All right, we're reading Kim Il Sung's Reminiscences on the Century. This is Kim Il Sung's life story, really the story of his family as well. The last chapter, we learned about his father's aim high and his father's work organizing against Japanese occupation and imperialism. And today we are on chapter 3, An Echo of Cheers for Independence. My father left home one very cold day. I anxiously waited for the spring. The cold was a great enemy for us, who were poorly fed and dressed. As the weather became a little warmer, my grandmother grew anxious, saying that soon it would be my birthday. Her worry came from her concern about how she could make my birthday not too bad during the lean spring, although the buds would be in flower and my father, who had gone to the north, would suffer less from the cold. Although my birthday is in the spring when the farmer's food has run out, my family used to put the table a bowl of boiled rice and an egg fried with shrimps. An egg was a sumptuous feast for our family, who could hardly afford even gruel. However, in the spring of that year, I gave no particular thought on my birthday. This was because my father's arrest had shocked me, and on top of that, I had constantly worried about my father, who was far away. Soon after my father left home, the March 1st popular uprising broke out. The March 1st popular uprising was an explosion of the pent-up anger and resentment of the Korean nation, who had been exposed to extreme humiliation and mistreatment under the 10-year-long brutal saber rule of Japanese imperialism. The 10 years that followed Korea's annexation by Japan were a period of ordeals, a period of darkness, and a period of starvation. During this period, our nation, living under medieval terrorism, which had reduced the country to a huge prison, was robbed of all social rights, including the freedom of speech, assembly, association, and demonstration, as well as its wealth, and groaned in desire of distress. Our people, who, following the country's annexation by Japan, had built up their strength through secret associations, the Independence Army and the Patriotic Enlightenment movement rose up boldly, unable to tolerate meekly this period of darkness, the period of plunder. The March 1st popular uprising was scrupulously planned and carried forward under the leadership of people in the religious world, from Chindoism, Christianity, and Buddhism, and patriotic teachers and students. The national spirit of our people, which had been inherited and sublimated through the Reformist Revolution in 1884, the movement for defending justice and rejecting injustice, the Peasant War of 1894, the Patriotic Enlightenment movement, and the volunteer struggle erupted at last like a volcano in a call for sovereignty and independence. In Pyongyang, thousands of young people, students, and citizens gathered at the playground of the Sungduk Girls' School in Jungdae Hill at 12 o'clock on March 1st, a bell summoning them there. There they read aloud the Declaration of Independence and solemnly proclaimed Korea to be an independent state, before holding a menacing street demonstration shouting the slogans, "Long live the independence of Korea," and Japanese troops get out. As the ranks of demonstrators thronged into the streets, tens of thousands of people joined them. People from Mangyeongdae and Chilgo also thronged to Pyongyang. We had our breakfast at dawn, and all our family left to take part in the demonstration and cheer for the independence of the country. The ranks of the demonstrators, which had numbered only several hundred when leaving, increased to several thousand. The demonstrating masses thronged towards the Pathang Gate, shouting, "Long live the independence of Korea," and beating drums and gongs. I, then 6 years old, also joined the ranks of the demonstrators in my worn out shoes, and went as far as Pathang Gate, cheering. It was hard for me to keep up with the adults, who were thronging towards the city in angry waves. So from time to time, I took off my straw sandals, the sliding shoes being a nuisance to me, and ran after the ranks with the shoes in my hand. When the adults cheered for independence, I joined them. The enemy used swords and guns indiscriminately against the masses, even mobilizing mounted policemen and troops. Many people were killed. Despite this, the demonstrators resisted the enemy fearlessly, becoming human weapons. A battle was fought in front of the Pathang Gate. This is the first time I saw one man killing another. This was the day when I witnessed Korean blood being spilled for the first time. My young heart burned with indignation. As the sun set and it became dark, the villagers climbed Mungyang Hill, with torches in their hands, and there they again cheered for independence, blowing bugles and beating drums and cans. The struggle continued in this way for many days. With my aunt, young Buck, I used to go up to Mungyang Hill after my mother, and there we cheered until late at night before going back down. My mother carried drinking water for other people and peeled hemp stalks to be used as torches. In Seoul, a courageous demonstration was held with the participation of hundreds of thousands of people, including those peasants who had come there from the provinces to attend the funeral of King Kojong. With a view to repressing the demonstration, the Japanese general Hasegawa mobilized the 20th Army Division stationed in Rungsang. The enemy brutally massacred the demonstrating masses, shooting and stabbing them. The streets of Seoul become a sea of blood in an instant. However, the demonstrators continued their march, the second rank stepping forward to the van if the front rank fell. People in other parts of the country also fought heroically, shedding their blood and not yielding to the brutality of the enemy, who suppressed the demonstrators by force of arms. When a young girl, student, had her right arm that held the national flag cut off by an enemy sword, she took the flag in her hand, and when she was unable to move any further, having had her left arm cut off too, she continued to shout, "Long live the independence of Korea," striking terror into the hearts of the Japanese imperialist soldiers and policemen. With the demonstration in Seoul and Pyongyang as the start, in the middle of March, the uprising swept across all the 13 provinces of the country, spreading even to the Korean compatriots elsewhere, such as Manchuria, Shanghai, and the maritime province of Siberia and Hawaii, and thus became truly a nationwide resistance. At that time, every Korean with a national conscience took part in this uprising, respective of occupation, religious belief, age, and sex. Even women from respectable families who would previously not have gone outdoors because of feudal custom, and Kisang girls who were treated as women of the lowest birth, formed ranks and rose in the demonstration. For a couple of months following the outbreak of the uprising, the whole country shook with cheers for independence. Then, as the spring and summer came, the spirit of demonstrations gradually began to flag. Many people believed that the enemy would withdraw if they raised their spirit and shouted cheers for only a few months. However, this was a delusion. It was most unlikely for Japanese imperialists to give up their occupation of Korea willingly in the face of such resistance. In order to seize Korea, Japan waged 3 wars. counting only the major ones. As long as 400 years ago, Kato Kiyomasa and Kiyoshi Yuginaka, Hideyoshi's subordinates, ignited a fire in the land of our country, bringing with them a large army amounting to hundreds of thousands of men. That incident was called the Imjiwaren, the Japanese invasion of Korea, 1592. As soon as Japan took the road of civilization through the so-called Meiji Restoration, in the middle of the 19th century, one of the first things her ruling circles advanced was the theory of the conquest of Korea. The theory of the conquest of Korea was an aggressive argument by the Japanese militarist group that they should conquer Korea by force of arms for the prosperity of Japan and for the greater strength of the emperor state. Although the theory of the conquest of Korea was not put into effect in those days because of disagreements among Japanese political circles and military authorities, the advocates of this theory raised a rebellion and waged a civil war for more than 6 months. It is said that a bronze statue of Seigo Takamori, head of the advocates of the theory of the conquest of Korea, who raised a large-scale rebellion against the emperor, stands even today in the state in Japan. Japan waged wars against China and Russia in order to swallow up Korea. The United States of America and Great Britain supported her superstitiously. A big word. They supported her eagerly. How cold-blooded Japanese military cliques can be seen from the following story. It was Nogi who commanded the Japanese forces at the Battle of Port Arthur during the Russo-Japanese War. In his attempt to seize Height 203, he went up the mountain by climbing up a ladder of corpses. They say that the grave on Pakshun and Port Arthur holds only some of the more than 25,000 people who were killed there at that time. Nogi won the war at a great cost, but he could seize neither Siberia nor Manchuria, despite the fact that he had boasted that he would swallow up both of them. Those Japanese who had been innocently deceived and became widows and orphans thronged to the wharf in misery, on hearing the rumor that Nogi was returning home. Their intention was to do him some harm. They are said, however, to have shut their mouths at the sight of the 3 boxes of ashes hanging on the breast of Nogi as he disembarked from the ship. Nogi had lost all 3 of his sons in battle. There's no knowing how truthful this story is. However, it was clear from this that the Japanese occupationists would not give up Korea readily. However, the leaders of the March 1st Popular Uprising defined the character of this movement as nonviolent from the outset, ignoring the elated fighting spirit of our people and oblivious to this historical lesson. They confined themselves to formulating a Declaration of Independence and clarifying to the world the intention of the Korean nation for its independence. They did not want the movement extending any further and turning into a mass struggle led by the popular masses. Some leaders of the nationalist movement went so far as to try to achieve the independence of Korea by means of a petition. When Wilson's theory of national self-determination was made public, they launched a shameful petition campaign in the preposterous belief that a decision might be reached on the independence of Korea at the Paris Peace Conference by the representatives of the United States of America and other parties of the Entente. Kim Kyu-sik and some other people visited the lodgings of the representatives of the great power with a petition for independence in their hands, appealing to them for help. However, the representatives of the parties to the Entente gave the Korean question no consideration. They were concerned only about themselves. Properly speaking, it was a miscalculation for senior figures from the national movement to pin their hopes on Wilson's theory of national self determination. The theory of national self determination, quote unquote, was a hypocritical slogan, which the US imperialists put forward in order to reduce the influence of the October Socialist Revolution and lord it over the rest of the world. Kim Il sung spitting here. Under the deceptive slogan of national self determination, the US imperialists schemed to undermine from within the multinational USSR and isolate small and weak colonial nations from one another to prevent them from uniting in the independence struggle. At the same time, they plotted to occupy the territory of the countries defeated in the war. No problem, Nabil. Welcome in. It was impossible for the US imperialists to help Korea to gain her independence because as early as the beginning of the 20th century, they had approved of Japan's invasion of Korea in the Katsura-Taft Treaty. There is no historical precedent for a major power to sympathize with a small country and give freedom and independence to the people of a weak country. The sovereignty of a nation can be achieved and preserved only through the independent efforts and indomitable strength of that nation. This is the truth which has been proved through many generations and centuries. During the Russo-Japanese War and the Portsmouth Peace Conference, King Kojong sent a secret envoy to the United States of America to call upon and to expose Japan's aggression and assist Korea in maintaining her independence. However, the United States of America unsparingly offered support in many varied ways to Japan, so that she could win the Russo-Japanese War. Then, at the Portsmouth Peace Conference, to discuss a post-war resettlement, it gave every possible assistance to Japan, so that the result of the conference would be favorable for her. President Roosevelt ignored the confidential letter from King Kojong on the grounds that it was not an official document. Kojong then sent emissaries to the International Peace Conference, held in The Hague, in an attempt to have the illegality of the USA Treaty, the treaty between Korea and Japan concluded in 1905, proclaimed and maintain the national rights by appealing to international justice and humanitarianism. However, the king's letter to the conference was not effective because of the persistent obstructive maneuvers of the Japanese imperialists and the lukewarm response of the representatives of the various countries. And all the efforts of the emissaries in appealing to the great powers for sympathy was frustrated. Under the pressure of the Japanese imperialists, Kojong was held responsible for having sent secret envoys and was forced to hand the throne over to Sunjong. The incident of the emissaries at The Hague was a loud alarm bell, which shook off the deep-rooted flunkiest consciousness of the feudal rulers. The red blood of Ri Jun, which dyed the site of the International Peace Conference, was a serious warning to future generation that no major power in the world would make a present of her independence to Korea, and that it would be impossible to gain the country's independence by relying on foreigners.
Juche is what's happening on this planet, y'all.
That the highest levels of the nationalist movement again pinned their hopes on the United States of America and the theory of national self-determination, without taking this lesson to heart, was because the ideas of worshipping and kowtowing to the America were deep-rooted in their minds. Whenever the country was in danger, the incompetent feudal rulers looked to the big countries and tried to shape the destiny of the country with their help. This was implanted in the minds of the highest levels of the nationalist movement. The March 1st popular uprising demonstrated that bourgeois nationalists could no longer be the leading force of the anti-Japanese national liberation movement. The class limitations of the leaders of the March 1st popular uprising was that they did not go so far as to totally reject Japan's colonial rule. They set the aim of the movement to be to obtain some concessions, which could ensure the interests of their own class within the limit of Japan's ruling system. This became the ideological basis, which later either reduced many of them to reformists or made some of them even call for autonomy as a compromise with the Japanese imperialists. Until that time, in our country, there existed neither a progressive idea capable of smashing reformism, nor a large army of the industrial proletariat who could fight under the guise of a progressive idea. The young working class of our country did not have its own party, whose mission it would be to establish Marxism Leninism as the idea of a new era, and to rally under its banner the working masses. If the popular masses of our country, who were groaning under the misrule of Japanese imperialists, were to find the true way ahead for their struggle, and have a vanguard which would defend their interests, they had to travel along a longer and thornier path. Though the March 1st popular uprising, our people became keenly aware of the fact that no movement could emerge victorious without a powerful leading force. Although millions of the masses came out into the streets in the resistance with the common desire to win back the country, their struggle was dispersed and spontaneous. It was waged not according to a unified program and combat plan, because they were not led by a working class, by the party. The March 1st popular uprising served a serious lesson that if the popular masses were to win the struggle for national liberation and freedom, they must fight in an organized way, with a correct strategy and tactic, under the leadership of the Revolutionary Party, and that they must completely reject flunkyism and prepare a strong revolutionary force for themselves. Although the March 1st popular uprising and the Korean people demonstrated to the whole world that ours are a people with a strong spirit of independence, who do not want to live as slaves of others, and that they are a people with indomitable stamina and ardent patriotism, who fears no sacrifice in order to regain their country. This uprising dealt a heavy blow to Japanese imperialists. In order to soothe the anti-Japanese feelings of the Korean people, after the March 1st popular uprising, the Japanese occupants had to change, although it was just from a form's sake, the saber rule for a civil government. So see, they went from Japanese imperialism in your face to now Japanese imperialism with a human face. With the March 1st popular uprising as a momentum, in our country, an end was put to the era of the bourgeois nationalist movement, and the national liberation struggle of the Korean people began to enter a new stage. The shouts for independence, which echoed to the whole world, shaking my ill-fated country, continued ringing in my ears throughout the summer. Those cheers made me mature at an early age. In the street in front of Pothong Gate, where I witnessed the fierce struggle between the demonstrating masses and the armed policemen, my world outlook leapt into a new phase. It can be said that my childhood ended as I shouted for independence, standing on tiptoe, squeezed in between the adults. The March 1st popular uprising marked the first time that I stood in the ranks of the people, and that the true image of our nation was implanted in my mind's eye. Whenever I heard the cheers for independence that echoed like a roll of thunder to my mind, I felt boundless pride in the indomitable fighting spirit and heroism of our people. In the summer of that year, we received a letter from my father. With the letter, my father sent me some Chinese ink sticks with the trademark Jinba Hung, and some writing brushes. They were a special gift for me to improve my handwriting. I ground one on the ink sticks into the inkstone, dipped a writing brush in it so that there was plenty of ink on it, and wrote the word father in bold characters on a sheet of Korean paper. That night, our family took turns to read the letter by lamplight. My uncle, Rung Hyung Ruk, read the letter 3 times. Although he was of carefree disposition, he was as carefree as someone elderly when reading letters. My mother read the letter quickly, and, handing it over to me, told me to read it aloud so that my grandfather and grandmother could hear it. Although I was under school age, I could read Korean letters because my father had taught me the Korean alphabet when he was at home. When he had finished reading the letter, my grandmother stopped her spinning and asked me, "Doesn't he say when he's coming back?" And without waiting for my answer, she said to herself, "Whether he is in Russia or Manchuria, this time he has been in a strange place for quite a long time." The fact that my mother had merely glanced at the letter worried me. So, when I went to bed, I told her in a whisper of what I remembered of my father's letter. My mother never took long over reading letters in the presence of my grandfather and grandmother. Instead, she would keep them in the breast of her coat and read them secretly during breaks as she worked in the field. When I told her of what I remembered of parts of the letter, my mother said, stroking my hair, "It's all right. Sleep now." My father returned home in early autumn of that year to fetch his family. It had been a year since we had seen my father. During that time, my father had worked hard to restore the organizations of the Korean National Association, win comrades, and rally the masses to the area of North Pyongyang province, such as Uji Changsok, Paktung, Chosun, and Junggang, as well as in Manchuria. It was around this time that my father convened the Cheonsudong meeting, November 1918. This meeting, which was attended by representatives of the organizations of the Korean National Association in North Pyongyang province, and by the liaison agents of the various regions, drew up policies for the immediate restoration of the organizations of the Korean National Association, and for rallying the proletarian masses closely around these organizations. My father, now back at home, told us many things, particularly about the news from Manchuria, and about Russia, about Lenin, and about the victory of the October Revolution. He told us that a new world had come to Russia, in which the workers, peasants, and other unpropertied masses had become the masters. He did not conceal his envy. He also expressed his great anxiety, saying that the newborn Russia was facing ordeals because of the attack of the White Party and the armed intervention of 14 countries. Because all of his stories were woven with vivid detail and facts, I thought that my father might have been to the maritime province of Siberia. Like Manchuria, the maritime province of Siberia was also a base for the Korean independence movement and an important rendezvous. At the time of the March 1st popular uprising, the number of Koreans residing there was several hundred thousand. In this area lived many patriots and fighters for independence who had gone there from Korea as exiles. It was through there that Ri Jun and his party went to The Hague, and Ri Jun Suk and Ri Sang Sol were also formed there, in Vladivostok. The combined headquarters of the volunteers from the 13 provinces of Korea. It was also here that the Korean Socialist Party, headed by Ri Tong-hui, started to disseminate Marxism-Leninism as the first socialist group of Korea. It was also in this area that the provincial government of Russia, known as the Korean National Assembly, was formed and proclaimed its existence at home and abroad. Yang Pom-do and Ang Jung-gun conducted their military activities, focused on this area. Korean fighters for independence and patriotic people who had come to the maritime province of Siberia as exiles formed self governing organizations and anti Japanese resistance organizations throughout the area and conducted vigorous activities for the restoration of national rights. Unity of the Independence Army based in the maritime province of Siberia advanced into such areas of North Hamgyong province and Kangwon and Konghang and attacked Japanese troops and policemen, thus seriously disrupting the enemy's rule and border guard. Some fighters for independence who had moved to this area from Manchuria formed large units and fought with the Red Army in defense of the Soviet Republic. When the combined forces of imperialism and the internal enemy who followed their dictates pounced upon the Soviet Union from all directions in order to strangle the newborn political regime, thousands of Korean young people gave their blood and gave their blood and lives with arms in hand, either in the guerrilla ranks of the Red Army in order to defend the socialist system, which mankind had longed for as their ideal. The names of the Koreans are engraved in large letters on the monuments erected in the Far East to the memory of the heroes of the Russian Civil War. Such people as Hung Pom-do, Ri Tong-hyo, and Ro Un-young, who had worked hard for the independence movement for some time in the Far East of the Soviet Union, met Lenin to gain his support for national liberation movement. The activities of the Korean fighters for independence in the maritime province of Siberia left traces which cannot be ignored in the history of the national liberation of our country, even though they once led to the heartbreaking tragedies of the Haihi incident, brought about by the interference of outside forces and the antagonism among various associations. And this is why, too, Lainey, I remind people that, like, Koreans understand the struggle that Palestinians and native people here went through in a way that large numbers of Europeans just don't, right? Hi, memories. I was not wrong to have guessed that my father had been to maritime province of Siberia in order to win comrades. My father told the family about the demonstration of the people in the northern border area, and we told him of how courageously the people of Kapyong sub-county had fought at the time of the March 1st popular uprising. Of what my father told us that day, the following is still vivid in my memory. He said, quote, "It is unlikely that robbers who have intruded into your house and are wielding knives will let you live simply because you make a fuss begging them for mercy. If the man outside is also a robber, he will not come to your aid when he hears your cry. If you want to save your life, you must fight the robbers. You can prevail over those who are armed with knives only when you fight them with a knife." Unquote. My father had already formed a new view and a new determination with regard to the independence movement. I learned later that at that time, oh, come on. Mumies, where are you going? Where are you trying to go? There's nowhere over there. Ugh, Mewms, you're sneezing on me now. Mewmies, please. Okay, I'm on page 49. I gotta reload this page here. There we go. Okay. Hi, Mewms. Yeah, they say it's not. Where are you trying to go? Up here? There. There you go. There's your spot. Okay. My father had already formed a new view and a new determination with regard to the independence movement. I learned later that at the time of the March 1st popular uprising, and before and after this uprising, my father had continually for the way ahead for national liberation, carefully following the events taking place at home and abroad, and conducting his activities with the northern border area and South Manchuria as his base. He also paid close attention to the process of the change in the socio-class relations of our country. As the lesson of the March 1st popular uprising shows, the aggressors will not withdraw if we only hold demonstrations and cheer. It would also be impossible to regain the country only through the struggle of the Independence Army. We must fight the aggressors with a nationwide effort because all the country has become the prison of the Japanese and it is covered with a forest of bayonets. To this end, we must make a popular revolution, as in Russia. The popular masses should rise up with arms in hand and fight the enemy to win back the country and establish a new society free from exploitation and oppression. This is the conclusion my father had drawn after all his hard work. This was the policy of the proletarian revolution.
Fucked it out.
He got out.
Yeah, and then he just came back in on his own like 20 minutes later.
Okay.
Like I was coming inside and he was like rushing to the door to get in.
Okay, did you start Little Larry chicken nuggets? Can you start me the oven for chicken pot pie? It says on the box up in there. What? Probably $3.50. Next time you go by the kitchen, please. Pot pie for supper, everyone. So you can see here, even his father, even Kim Il-sung's father, was ready for proletarian revolution, right? It wasn't just Kim Il-sung, who's like the father of Marxism in Korea. Even his father was realizing this. With the independence movement unable to get out of its stagnation, and only blood being spilled. not that kind of pot pie, although that will come when as soon as that will come. Okay, 420. I will redeem that as soon as I'm done reading this chapter to y'all. Here, Mimis, let me help you. With the independence movement unable to get out of its stagnation, and only blood being spilled, my father asserted that a popular revolution should be made, necessitating a fresh method. After the October Socialist Revolution had emerged victorious in Russia, my father began sympathizing with the communist ideology. Later, with the March 1st popular uprising as a momentum, he formed his own idea and a firm resolution that the national liberation movement in our country should shift from a nationalist movement to a communist movement. At the Shangsudong meeting held in January 1919, my father proved the historical necessity of the proletarian revolution. On the basis of this, he convened in August of that year a meeting of the heads of the various districts of the Korean National Association, liaison agents, and chiefs of the organizations for independence in Hangtong District, Kundian County, China, formally proclaimed the policy of shifting the anti-Japanese national liberation movement from a nationalist to a communist movement, and advanced, in keeping with the change at the time, the task of defeating Japanese imperialism with the strength of our nation, and building a new society, which would ensure the rights and interests of the unpropertied masses. Let's go. My father's proposal of the policy of shifting from a nationalist to a communist movement is another of his exploits in the anti Japanese national liberation movement. My father used to explain his idea of the proletarian revolution plainly as the building of a new society which would provide rice to those who had no food supply and clothes to those who had no clothing. And through his practical activities, he awakened the workers, peasants, and other working masses to a progressive idea and united them into one revolutionary force by forming and expanding a variety of mass organizations. Another feat my father achieved was his success in the struggle to prepare for fresh armed activities and unite armed groups. My father expedited the preparations for fresh armed activities out of his conviction that the country should be regained only through armed activities, not through petitions and diplomacy. My father's plan was to select patriotic young people from the proletariat and train them into military cadres, ideologically remold the commanders and the rank and file of the existing armed organizations, and thus turn the ranks into an armed force of the workers and peasants that was capable of carrying out the proletarian revolution. Having put forward this policy, my father sent members of the Korean National Association to various units of the Independence Army to guide them in various matters. In the spreading of progressive ideas in the armed units, in the purchasing of weapons, and in the training of military cadres, and the increasing of the combat efficiency of the army. At the same time, he worked hard to achieve the unity of the armed units. What distressed my father most in those days was the lack of unity in the ranks of the independence movement. At that time, there were many units of the independent army and organizations engaged in the independence movement in Jindao and the maritime province of Siberia. The so-called Association of Koreans, the Korean Independent Association, the Theguk Association, the War Fundraising Association, and such like would spring up overnight. There were more than 20 such organizations engaged in the independence movement in South Manchuria alone. If these organizations had united with one another and worked hand in hand with one another, they would have been able to display great strength. However, the factionalists became engaged in a scramble for power from the start, rejecting other organizations and regarding them jealously. Once again, Larry's latest self-crit, latest whatever political development proves correct from looking at other people's experience. See my big long message in Discord. And join us in being an ambassador of the Juche gang by going into other spaces and remembering that we all want to unite on the basis of anti-imperialism. That it's okay if they currently don't have the correct opinion on Russia or even China right now, that we can help comrades get there, and that the most important thing is that they are against US imperialism, they are against rising fascism. And we can encourage them to go into our Marxist-Leninist spaces and just encourage them to work with us and hear from us and see what side we're on along with them. And in doing so, they'll be more willing to hear what our positions are, rather than just being the weird communists. You know what I mean? Isolated, etc. Which, that's what all communist orgs strive to do, is work with as many groups and organizations as possible. And then you have somebody will look and be like, oh, look, they organize with all of these groups in this particular anti-war protest. And I'm like, yeah, that's good actually, though. How do you think the message spreads? How do you think our platform spreads? We don't have mass media. The closest thing to mass media we have is like what me, Madeline Pendleton, and other comrades on Twitch are doing. And that's hardly perfect, right? Because what we really want is the distribution of party ideas, of the ideology and the news coming from the party, statements coming from the party. And the way we do that is by first making the party popular so that people go looking for the party statements and the party news and stuff like that, right? That means we do have to get it. We have to do the work. We have to try and like unite with as many of those orgs as we possibly can, and that's exactly why PSL does that. And the other parties, the good ones, and the ACP being shut out of that is why they organize with Trotskyist orgs that are pro-imperialist. Hi, Sodi. Everybody say hi to Sodi. Look at her. She's the cute soda. Hi, Sodi.
The baby. What are you looking at?
Are you cute, Sodi?
Oh,
She's gonna.
She's done. He's so neat.
Look at her pretty tail, everybody. Oh. She's a quick kitty. Quick kitty with a pretty tail. That emote is not her, but it looks like her, so, you know, it's close enough. It's close enough.
Eating like full French fries.
What?
Yumi's is eating like full French fries.
Well, you should tell Darius.
There's his food's there.
What? Yeah, but you gotta remind him. He's like addicted to the computer. You gotta harp on him a bit. Okay. Sorry. At that time, there were many units. Oh, I already said that part.
Hey, Bobby.
However, I want to repeat the last part of this, though, because, again, this was my own self-crit that I had to do just a little while ago. That I'm still trying to implant into myself, I guess, firmly. Which is that if these organizations had united with one another and worked hand in hand with one another, they would have been able to display great strength. However, the factionalists became engaged in a scramble for power from the start, rejecting other organizations and regarding them jealously. If this situation was not put to right, there was a fear that the ranks of the independence movement would be disrupted and the movement forsaken by the people or destroyed piecemeal by the enemy. And it would be impossible to promote the great cause of shifting the direction of the movement, which my father had resolved to undertake. Under these circumstances, when my father heard that the conflict between the Korean Independence Youth Organization and the Yangji Youth League had become aggravated, he hastened to Kundian, and while staying there for several days, he persuaded the leaders of the two organizations to merge. Thanks to my father's efforts, the armed organizations in the area along the River Amnok, such as the Corps for the Promotion of Industry and the War Fundraising Corps, merged to form the National Corps. Fuck yeah. That's movement building, baby. It can be said that my father's intention was preparing for a fresh armed activities, was to build up the strength of the armed organizations with people of worker and peasant origin, to make a fresh start in the armed activities geared to the communist movement, and ensure that the various armed organizations worked in concert by merging them. My father was concerned with implementing the policy of shifting the direction of the movement until the evening of his life, and in the course of this, he suffered from persistent illness. After the policy of shifting the direction of the movement to the communist movement was proclaimed at the Kundiwan meeting, the process of ideological disintegration was accelerated among the nationalists. With my father bedridden, some of those who shared his ideas and purpose were arrested. Some became turncoats, and others were scattered. So, there remained only a few people who would work for the communist movement. Conservatives from among the nationalists were building a wall against the new. However, many progressive people chose the new road and later joined the communist revolution with us. My father's idea about the communist movement served as a great food for my growth. And there you go. That brings us to the end of chapter 3.